This first one I'm going to be reading is from the user Southern_list3207, and it is called My Experience in the Woods. I'm fairly new to Reddit, so only discovered this sub recently. Using a throwaway account here because I didn't feel comfortable enough sharing this on my main account. I've lurked for a little while, and I think it's the perfect place to share the story of an experience I had about 9 to 10 years ago. The reason I'm sharing this is A, because that's the point of this sub, and I've enjoyed reading other people's experiences, but B, to see if anyone has a similar experience / an idea of what this could have been, because I never have. Before I start, I've told this story to lots of people over the years, friends, family, and even acquaintances whenever supernatural / scary stuff has come up in conversation. But I've always left out the finer details on purpose. Because honestly, I think I have some Latin trauma from it. I don't like going into detail about it or reliving this experience. Instead, I have only ever recounted this as a 60-second scary story to elicit a reaction, probably as a coping mechanism. My girlfriend is the only person I have ever told the full story. This experience happened while I was camping on my own in a forest in Wales. I live in England near the Welsh border. This is something I've done dozens of times and continue to do to this day. I think it was April or May 2013 or 2014. Weather was unseasonably good, and this was the second of 3 nights that I'd planned for my trip, although it ended up being the last. First night and second day had been great. Got a lovely dog hike in, followed by a pub lunch. Got a lovely long hike. I said dog hike. Anyways, got a lovely long hike in, followed by a pub lunch. I'd driven back to the area I was staying, and I was now back at my tent. I settled down for the night, read a book, and had some beers and went to sleep. It was probably between 11 p.m. and midnight. I was just in that state where you're semi-conscious, about to drift off, but haven't quite just yet. I slowly became aware of a melodic noise somewhere outside the tent. It didn't sound that close, maybe within like 50 feet. It sounded like a person perfectly humming a tune. After listening for a couple minutes, it was definitely somebody humming a tune, and when I say perfectly, I mean just that. It sounded like a professional singer or something because it was so perfectly in tune, no voice breaks or falters at all. I can't remember whether it sounded like a man or a woman. At this point, I'm shitting myself because it's just incredibly creepy, like something from a horror film. I hadn't left my tent at this point, and the humming hadn't gotten any louder. It just stayed a distant background noise. I didn't know what to do, but knew I couldn't just stay there forever, so I mustered the courage to open my tent as slowly and quietly as I could to see if I could see anything or tell where the noise was coming from. Within 5 seconds of me poking my head out of the tent, the humming stopped. It didn't fade away or anything, it just stopped dead as if someone had pressed pause on a recording. I'm still very on edge at this point, but at the time I assume that's just what it is. Someone playing a prank on solo campers with an audio recording. I literally couldn't think of a better explanation. Based on that assumption, I shouted something like, "You're not funny, F off." That made me feel a little bit better because it felt like I'd addressed the issue. I don't know, but for whatever reason, it helped my nerves a bit at the time. I let that hang in the air for like 10 more seconds whilst my head is poking out of the tent and it stays quiet. I'm kind of satisfied by this point, so I begin moving back in. As I'm reaching for the tent zipper though, the humming starts again. Same tune, but much louder, much closer, and from the complete opposite direction. My heart completely sinks because there is no way someone could have moved from the first source of the noise to the second without me seeing or hearing something. Literally impossible. It was perfectly quiet in the woods, not even any breeze against the leaves, and yeah, it was dark, but I could still see short distances thanks to the moonlight. In the back of my mind, though, my subconscious is clearly working overtime trying to rationalize this, and I guess I must have assumed that there were multiple pranksters out there with multiple audio recordings. I can't exactly remember what my thought process was at this point because it's truthfully all a blur, but for one reason or another, I stormed angrily out of the tent toward the now quite loud sound. It sounded as if the person humming was within like 10 feet of the tent. I got up out of the tent, turned towards the noise, ready to scream at the perpetrator or even attack if necessary. And that's when I see this humanoid figure silhouetted against the tree line, maybe 15 feet away from me. My best description of it is this. It was a large, thin figure that was shaped like a human, but way too tall and proportioned all wrong. It was huge. I would guess over 7 feet. Its limbs were unnaturally long, like it had been stretched out in all directions. Its head appeared very small and rounded. I think the figure was gray in color, but I can't be 100% sure because of poor visibility. I couldn't make out much of its face at all. It just seemed to be shrouded in shadow. I definitely didn't notice any features like eyes, nose, or mouth. It was standing quite still, facing directly towards me. I say quite still because there was some movement, in the way that a person or animal would sway back and forth or make some minor body movements, etc. if they were standing up. This was a real, living thing. I know that for a fact. Not an illusion, not a prop or prank. This thing was standing right in front of me and was aware of my presence. I'm literally paralyzed by fear at this point. I have never felt anything like it before or since. Just a primal terror which has left me cold, shaking, just standing there quite literally unable to move. I distinctly remember thinking that I needed to get away, but I could not physically move my body. It was the most terrified I have ever been. As I first laid eyes on the creature, the humming stopped, and immediately it started up again, but not a song. It started softly singing my name, in what sounded like my voice. That sounds effing ridiculous, I know, but I swear that's how I remember it. Even though it was singing in my voice, though, it didn't sound right. The syllables were just off, as though a non-human had heard speech once and was trying to mimic it for the first time, poorly. I haven't described that well, but I don't think I know the words to do so. This can't have gone on for more than about 10 seconds, but it felt like forever. Me standing there, this creature standing motionless and singing my name. At some point, though, every cell in my body just switched, and I managed to turn and run as fast as I ever have in the opposite direction. For maybe 2 minutes, I was literally sprinting through the woods in just my socks and PJs, with absolutely no other thought in mind other than putting distance between myself and that thing. I had no idea which direction I was going or how I'd make it back to my tent. When I eventually stopped, I just leaned against this tree, panting for ages. The forest was completely silent. I must have stayed by that tree for about 2 hours, waiting for my heart rate to settle, trying to calm down and decide what to do. I didn't want to go back to my tent. I was quite happy to leave all my stuff there, but I needed my phone and car keys to get home. I was several miles away from anywhere. I eventually made my way back. It wasn't too hard to navigate back to my tent in those woods because the tree distribution wasn't very dense. I also hadn't gone as far as I first feared, lol. Once back at my tent, I grabbed my phone and keys and went back to my car as fast as I was comfortable. Spent the rest of the night sitting in the back seat on my phone, shaking, didn't even try to get any sleep. Once the sun was up, I managed to go back and pack my stuff up and left as quickly as I could. After that, I took a 2+ year break from solo camping, something I normally did every 3 to 4 months. So that's my experience. Make of it what you will. This has stayed with me ever since, and I know it always will. I don't know what was in the woods with me that night, but it has scarred me and transformed the way I think about supernatural experiences, etc. If anyone has encountered anything similar to what I described, I'd be interested to hear. Thanks for reading, and sorry this was so long. So, I think that's a good start. I read that one and I really enjoyed it. If any of you have ever read the book called Stolen Tongues, I can't remember the author, but the creature in this story reminds me a lot of the creature in that story, and I can't even imagine witnessing that in person. It sounds like something from a movie, right? But this was someone's real life experience, and I just can't imagine being in that position. Okay. The next one I'm going to read is called Voices in the Canopy. And this is from the user, The Fractal Wizard. This is the story of an experience I had in Cradle Mountain National Park in Tasmania, Australia, in my early teens. Despite causing no physical injury, it has haunted me into adulthood. I grew up in a family of avid hikers, both my mother, a botanist, and my father, a biologist for the University of Tasmania, would regularly visit the deepest wilderness areas of Tasmania during their field studies. These trips were disguised as camping and hiking adventures for the family. I never minded, as I was just as passionate about the outdoors as they were, even from a young age. Keyword being was, as after what I went through, even 20+ years later, I still refuse to return. We lived on a property a short driving distance from Lake St. Clair, a popular tourist destination. This was the only place my parents would allow me to camp and experience the wilderness alone, as long as I brought my German Shepherd with me. He was a former police dog and very well trained. At 12 or 13 years old, I didn't mind. It felt like my own little slice of freedom and my own little slice of wilderness. Despite being surrounded by people, it was easy to ignore them. But as I got older and more brazen, I found myself hounding my parents to let me take my quad bike deeper into the park to camp, to test my own abilities and prove to them that I was capable of doing so and that I wasn't a little kid anymore. It was that overconfidence that led me to this situation and caused me this trauma. I was 15 at the time of the experience, at the age where I thought I was invincible, knew all there was to know, and was untouchable. After asking my parents for what felt like an uncountable number of times and being told no just as many times, I had enough and decided to just go. I told my parents that I and a few friends were going to the lake to camp and do some fishing over the weekend. Instead, I took my tent, my quad, and headed into the reserve. I left just after sunrise to maximize daylight and make it as far in as I felt comfortable. Once arriving, I set up camp and had some food and decided to go for an explore. I knew of a spot nearby with a gorgeous rock face where fossils had been found in the past, so I thought I would try my luck. Shortly into the walk, I realized I had been turned around and I had no idea where I was anymore. At the time, I didn't see it as that big of a deal, as I had a compass and knew that if I headed south, it would take me back to the lake and I could walk from there. However, by this time, it was getting late into the afternoon, so stupidly I decided to try my chances and make it back to camp and quad bike so I wasn't walking back to camp from the lake in the dark. Big mistake. I say silent, I mean silent. No wind, no birds, no forest sounds at all, which made my heart rate skyrocket. It was getting dark and the silence was suffocating. I just wanted to get back to my camp, light a fire, eat some snacks, and spend my night watching nature's television until I fell asleep. That's when, from every direction, I could hear the sound of twigs cracking and something moving in the canopy above me. No big deal, probably birds or other small animals, I thought. But then, as clear as day, "Hey, come here." At first, I felt relieved as I thought someone along the trails had seen me, noticed I was a bit disheveled, and wanted to help. But looking around, I saw no one, and then it happened again. But behind me this time, the same voice. But I noticed it was coming from up in the trees. I responded, "I can't see. Where are you?" and asked for some help because I just thought I couldn't see the person calling out. But then it happened again, from my left this time, and that's when I decided to run. I took off into the brush and ran for a good 2 minutes before I stopped to catch my breath and look at my compass to start making my way toward the lake. I was terrified but felt like I had covered enough distance that I wasn't in immediate danger. But seconds after checking my compass and starting to walk, I heard it again. "Hey, come here." But this time, it was right behind me. I spun around and saw absolutely nothing, so I began sprinting again and did not stop. The last thing I heard before bursting out of the trees onto the lakefront was the most evil, demonic laugh I have ever heard. It sounded like 3 people laughing at once. I immediately called my parents to come get me, told them what I did and what happened, but they were more focused on my disobedience than my experience. The moment they picked me up was the first time I felt relief, and I cried the whole drive home. I didn't sleep properly for days. My dad went and picked up my quad and tidied up my camp, and since that day, I haven't stepped foot away from the lake. If anyone has had an experience like this, I would love to hear it because it took my passion from me. I miss being out away from society, but I can't bring myself to do it. So scary. Just like the last story, I can't even imagine witnessing that myself. If you've ever been out in the woods at night, it becomes very... Sorry, this chair's being loud. But it is so disorienting and creepy. Everything starts to look the same. You can get turned around very easily. I've had an experience like that, not like this story we just read, but going into the woods, and it started to get dark. I was with a couple other people, so it wasn't so bad, but we went into the woods when it wasn't so dark yet, and then it got dark, and it's like all of a sudden you're in a completely different place. It's very disorienting and creepy, and everything looks the same, and yeah, anyways. I'm gonna read one more. This isn't really like, well, I guess it is still a story, but this is a comment on a post that I found. This is from the user iron_Annie, and it says, "I think for me personally, the absolute scariest experience I had in one of the coastal forests was when I was out around midnight to photograph the marine bioluminescence glowing in the ocean. I was alone on a dark, winding stretch of road with the ocean below a cliff on one side and a thick spruce forest on the other side. It was pitch black, probably around 1 a.m., and I was driving home from the photography session. The glow of the ocean can only be seen in pitch black, so I didn't have a flashlight or even my phone out in order to cut back on light pollution. Just the stars and the glowing blue waves. I had already moved places twice that night because I had heard bipedal footsteps slowly stalking through the trees a couple hours hours earlier, and it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I have been working in PNW conservation since I was 19, so I'm fairly comfortable out in nature. Plus, I have my conceal carry, so I'm always packing a gun with me. I'm a short woman in my 30s, and you can never be too careful out there. Anyway, I'd already been made wary once by the unidentifiable. I'm sorry, I cannot read. Anyway, I'd already been made wary once by the unidentifiable footsteps, so by the time I was finished photographing the ocean and stars, I was ready to get out of there. But as I was driving through this stretch of road in the blackness, my headlights caught a strange shape up ahead on the road. It was pale, almost glowing white-gray in color, shaped like an upside-down U. One half of it was planted on the side of the road, and it was bending, so that way the other end was in the road. As I approached it, I thought it might be a larger piece of driftwood, which is often pale in color. I was going about 55 miles per hour. I know this road very well because the ocean research team I work with sometimes is located nearby. I thought it was odd that I hadn't noticed this giant piece of driftwood when I drove past this spot on my way in. My car got closer and I kind of froze in horror and refused to look as I neared it, because I realized it wasn't a log or driftwood, but a tall, skinny figure like a stretched out pale man with elongated limbs, doing a twisted backbend into the road. It had two round, hollow-looking eyes that shone when the headlights hit it, and giant twisted antlers like a deer. Its head was upside down so that the antlers were upside down, but it was widely grinning and staring at me, bent into a backbend into the road with its legs in the ditch and its hands in the road. I stepped on the gas and floored it past the thing, refusing to make eye contact, terrified that my car would randomly stop and leave me in the middle of nowhere with this thing. I called my friend, bawling, and she thought that I was in serious danger because I'm known in my circles for being a tough lady that goes out in the woods alone for days, and I've taken a lot of wilderness survival and ethnobotany classes. But this thing was different. It horrified me even though the sighting only lasted a few seconds. It wasn't the end of it either. I had a couple more run-ins with it over that summer. If anyone wants to hear, I can share more.